Hello, I'm Marc-André Francoeur. This is number 0822, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0822. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, sports writer Andrew Forbes, author of Fieldwork on Baseball and Making a Living, is back on the show, this time to talk about Major League Baseball's decision about Pete Rose and the other list of players from 1919 who were banned for life from the Baseball Hall of Fame.
The existence of this list is a little bit confusing because it's the ineligible list for activity within the sphere of Major League Baseball, what used to be the distinct American and National Leagues, which is a completely separate entity from the Hall of Fame. But because of Rose himself, who was found to have gambled on the game when he was managing the Cincinnati Reds back in 1989, the Hall of Fame created this rule, which said that people who were on Major League Baseball's ineligibility list could not be voted into the Hall of Fame.
Saxophonist, music producer, and author Jackiem Joyner talks about his career and his book, Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. He's written several books in the past, but Bold Moves is his first non-fiction title, which he calls his unexpected book.
I didn't think I would be putting something out that's inspiring people to take bold action, take bold moves. I was sitting one day because I have lots of notes and affirmations that I've been writing and collecting just to keep myself in tune with life and just everything that I got to take on every day, every week, every year in order to really make my mark here on this earth. So I was just thinking to myself, these notes that I've written would really be nice if I refined them and perhaps gave them away.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with the weird story for the month of May. This one deals with getting messages to the Martians.
This is a story about Professor David Todd, who wanted to receive signals from Martians in 1909 when Mars was in opposition to Earth. So what that means is Mars was at its closest point in its orbit to Earth that year. There was a lot of belief amongst the scientific community in intelligent life on Mars at that time, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the thought that there was intelligent Martians there who might be trying to send us signals, and how could we receive those signals? So in 1909, there was a great headline that ran in newspapers that said, "Balloon trip to hear Mars talk."
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guests later. The person who told you this was show number 0822 was Marc-André Francoeur, who is a real estate agent with RE/MAX Royal Jordan Incorporated here in Montreal. Thank you very much, Marc-André, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A Slidell, Louisiana Lowe's home improvement store was the site of a startling discovery on May 11th when 66-year-old James Caliavas of Jasper, Georgia, was found in a display storage shed at the store with his pants around his ankles and a tub of Vaseline at hand.
Vaseline Petroleum Jelly. Quality you can trust to smooth, soothe, soften your skin in so many ways, so many places. No wonder it's called
Vaseline, the Wonder Jelly.
I don't think this is what the company had in mind. Anyway, Caliavas admitted enjoying the pleasure of his own company while watching YouTube in the shed. He was arrested for obscenity and booked into the county jail.
Lowe's knows how to help you spring.
I don't think that this is what this company had in mind either. A 24-year-old by the name of Seth Davidson, an employee of Oak Lawn Memorial Gardens in Fisher, Indiana, was arrested on May 12th after he dug up a grave to retrieve a gold ring from an urn. Officers patrolling the area that evening noticed an empty car parked nearby. As they investigated, Davidson walked out of the woods covered in dirt and said it was his car. He told officers he hadn't been able to stop thinking about the ring, which he intended to pawn. Prosecutors charged him with cemetery mischief, criminal trespass, and theft. This guy is actually an employee of the cemetery. His fellow workers must be laughing at him right now.
That employee of the month thing isn't really working out for you, is it?
And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, remember the innocence of going to school? These two next items are not that kind of story. 33-year-old Ashley Pardo of San Antonio was arrested on May the 12th and charged with aiding in the commission of terrorism. The charges were related to Pardo allegedly supplying her middle school son with ammunition and tactical gear in exchange for him babysitting his younger siblings. Police were called to the home after the grandmother saw rifle and pistol magazines loaded with live ammunition in his room along with a homemade explosive device. Jeremiah Rhodes Middle School had clocked his interest in violence, but Pardo expressed to the school her support of his violent expressions and drawings and does not feel concerned with his behavior. On May the 12th, he went to school and then left the campus, after which extra security was put in place. He was later located elsewhere and charged with an undisclosed crime. Yeah, there's some strong family values, huh? And in our second school story, a kindergartner in the greater Johnstown, Pennsylvania school district brought treats to school on May the 14th. Sweet. Unfortunately, the tasty treats were Jell-O shots with alcohol that 3 fellow students enjoyed. When school officials learned about the shots, immediate action was taken, with the kids going to the nurse's office and then to a local hospital for evaluation out of an abundance of caution. The district said it is working with authorities to find out how the student came into possession of the shots. Well, if the child is extremely precocious and can handle measuring ingredients, there are dozens of Jell-O shot recipes on YouTube. School's out. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program. We had Andrew Forbes on the show just earlier this month to talk about his book, Fieldwork, on baseball and making a living. We're having him back now because of a recent bombshell of an announcement involving Major League Baseball and the legacy of Pete Rose. Once again, Andrew joins us via Zoom from Peterborough, Ontario. Hi, Andrew.
Hello again.
Thanks for being on the program with us once again. I say bombshell, not because of just the Pete Rose past and the fact that he can potentially be in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, but because it's such a sweeping rule, which allows not only Pete Rose, but several other players who have been banned from baseball to eventually get in post-death.
Yeah, and I think that of that group, and I think there are 17 names or so, something like that on the list. I think, there's Rose, his conduct on his play on the field warrants the conversation. He's the all-time hit king, of course. And Joe Jackson, shoeless Joe Jackson of the White Sox,
exactly.
And before that of Cleveland.
Yeah.
They're really the only two that have any shot at the Hall of Fame. And I think, honestly, I think that it was done in this way. Do you mind if I get cynical here?
Sure.
I think it was done in this way in order to kind of launder this announcement, because I don't think we're having this conversation right now if the American president back in March, I think it was, doesn't spew on his social media that he thinks Pete Rose should be pardoned and should be in the Hall of Fame.
There are two issues there, because one is the gambling that Pete Rose
Yeah.
did, but one was all of his legal problems, which technically speaking can be pardoned. It doesn't necessarily make him into the Hall of Fame, but that's apples and oranges.
That's right. And his ineligibility, as well as the other 16 on that list, stems from them having touched baseball's third rail, which is gambling on the sport, right? Of course, the infamous 1919 Chicago White Sox, who were found to have thrown the series to the Reds. And let's talk about, is it poetry or is it overdetermined kind of stagecraft that had this announcement coming out on a day when the Reds were hosting the White Sox 100 and whatever years later? The existence of this list is a little bit confusing because it's the ineligible list for activity within the sphere of Major League Baseball, what used to be the distinct American and National Leagues, which is a completely separate entity from the Hall of Fame. But because of Rose himself, who was found to have gambled on the game when he was managing the Cincinnati Reds back in 1989, the Hall of Fame created this rule, which said that people who were on Major League Baseball's ineligibility list could not be voted into the Hall of Fame. In essence, I think Manfred's statement, Commissioner Rob Manfred's statement, was to do two things. Number one, it was to kick this question now over to the Hall of Fame definitively. It's no longer Major League Baseball as an entity, which is keeping Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. And also in including all of those other guys, it was, as I mentioned, to kind of launder this a little bit, because there does seem to be a great deal of public sentiment which is sympathetic to, if not all of the White Sox, then at least to Shoeless Joe Jackson, whose numbers suggest that he was not booting the ball. He was not swinging at bad pitches during that World Series. His numbers are very good, though we cannot take away from the fact that we have the receipts and know that he took the gamblers' money. So anyway, I think that in making this broad sweeping statement in Major League Baseball, and in essence kind of playing semantics and saying, well, permanence, because it was the permanent ineligibility list, permanence only means while a person is alive, which there's a question there, I think, for philosophers, but that was their out, I think. I think that was their carefully, committee constructed statement to say this is going to be someone else's problem now. Now it's in the lap of the Hall of Fame.
First of all, I've always said from day one, because I actually believed in the statement that was done by Bart Giamatti, who was the commissioner at the time. I always believed that Pete Rose should be out of the Hall of Fame, but he could get in death. That I always believed. The other thing I believe is that Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis was really heavy-handed with a lot of players, including Joe Jackson. And I don't know if Benny Koff, who was banned in 1921, if he had numbers good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know that. But the thing that I find, which just proves to me that Landis was heavy-handed, is he was kicked out despite the fact that he had an acquittal on an auto theft charge that was filed against him. So he was acquitted for something essentially he did not do.
Right.
So I don't know that. And I will also say that to me, the greatest travesty in Major League Baseball is still the fact that the Astros didn't have that World Series pulled from them because of cheating.
Which happened under Manfred's watch, of course, right?
Exactly.
It was fairly early in his reign. I mean, the office of the commissioner only exists, and Landis being the first commissioner, in order to clean up the problem, the perception of a problem of gambling in baseball. Gambling and baseball, they are together from their birth, their infancy. Both, baseball does not, frankly, exist without gambling and gamblers. It's always been there. But the size and the visibility of the Black Sox scandal was such that the owners felt that they needed to do something that looked as though they were taking definitive steps to stamp out that gambling and corruption in baseball. So Landis is a tough federal judge who's already done them a favor in delaying a ruling on the federal baseball case and all of this other stuff, which we could get into the weeds. If this was a 3-hour show, we could get into all that. So Landis, you're right, comes down very hard on gambling because it's the reason that he has that job. It's exactly what he's there to do. To your other statement, should Rose be in? It's a sticky thing, but I think that Pete Rose had ample opportunity to get back into the good graces of Major League Baseball. Now, Giamatti, as you mentioned, was the commissioner when Rose was banned.
Right.
Giamatti dies within weeks of issuing that ban. He has a heart attack and dies. So it becomes, I believe, Fay Vincent is the next commissioner before
Fay Vincent
before
Bud
Selig.
Yeah.
Yeah, an owner, which is itself problematic. But Rose spent 15 years completely denying that he bet on anything while he was a manager or a player, vehemently denying it. I really do believe there's an avenue there for Rose to come clean, admit to his mistakes, apologize, and get off the ineligible list, because it is completely the judgment of the commissioner that keeps people on that list. And he refuses to do it. And not until he's got a book to sell, which contains the bombshell declaration that he did bet on games while he was the Reds manager, on Reds games, does he even admit to that. And then it's years later, he continues to deny that he bet while he was a player until he's shown the receipt. And somebody says, no, we know that you did that as well. So Rose is a very problematic figure for a number of reasons. We haven't even talked about the other allegations about his personal life that have come to light even more recently. But in terms of what he did in baseball, if that's your only concern, he broke the cardinal sin and would not admit to it and would not come clean about it.
I think one of the problems is the fact that as a personality, let's be honest, Pete Rose was not a nice guy. He was not loved by his teammates. As a matter of fact, Frank Robinson said, who was adamant, he said if Rose gets into the Hall of Fame, he said he wouldn't be part of the Hall anymore if they let Rose in. And that was a former teammate.
That's right. No, I mean, his reputation for being a hard-nosed player was obviously well-earned. The walk through hell in a gasoline suit to play baseball comment, I think, was true, but I think that also made him a difficult person to be around.
I think he was right. I think he was Lenny Dykstra with more warmth.
And a longer career, which allowed him to amass all those hits, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. But look, the fact of the matter is, you've been in a major league clubhouse. You've seen Rule 21 pasted to the wall, the conduct rule, which includes the language specifically concerning gambling and thou shalt not, and the use of the term permanently ineligible, those two words, which I believe were coined by Kennesaw Mountain Landis. It is the thing that you can't do. And we know definitively that he did it, and he would not make himself an instrument of redemption. He could, Major League Baseball, I'm sure, would have been happy to say, look, Pete, if you spend 2 years going around to every spring training camp and talking to young players about the evils of gambling, so on and so forth, but he wouldn't do it. And I don't know, to my mind, I don't think there's enough that's changed simply by his no longer being alive to erase all of that. And on top of that, again, I'll be cynical. Social media posts by the current blusterer-in-chief, I think, are the reason this gets done. And the fact that Rob Manfred, as Commissioner of Baseball, has got a lot of things that he needs the U.S. government to remain on side for. Whether it's the antitrust exemption, which goes back to the 1920s and allows baseball to operate as a monopoly. Whether it's the visas of all of the foreign-born players that probably don't receive the same level of scrutiny as some other non-U.S. born person within the borders of the United States. And the negotiations right now, and that Manfred is trying to stick handle through an incredible series of obstacles to get every single Major League Baseball team off of conventional television or broadcast television or cable television and into streaming packages, which requires the cooperation of the FCC to make happen. So he needs not to alienate or anger a very temperamental human being who's in the Oval Office right now. And when that temperamental human being says something as uninformed, emotional, and silly as Pete Rose should be pardoned, unfortunately, Rob Manfred has got to play ball.
But even though he has removed this particular obstacle, Manfred doesn't have the final say. Rose has got to go before the ERA committee, which could vote in 2028 or 2027 with enshrinement in 2028. Yeah. So just because he's lifted this roadblock doesn't mean he gets voted in. I also think it's kind of ironic that the whole thing is on betting, and nowadays so much betting is taking place officially with FanDuel and DraftKings and the likes, and the list goes on and on and on. You know that this will probably be one of the most heavily bet items, whether Pete Rose gets in or not.
True. That's funny. Oh God, the way things come around. And I think there's a larger argument to be made by a better thinker and writer than me about how this is emblematic of this age that we're in of breaking all the norms and how the old rules and the old standards no longer apply. And you're right. Joe Jackson, who we've spoken about, the rule about complete ineligibility for the Hall of Fame by people on the commissioner's ineligibility list is not an old one. That only goes back to the Rose case. 1991, they made that rule. Jackson was eligible for the Hall of Fame, right? There was nothing preventing people from putting his name on the ballot. And he did receive votes, but very few, and that is because that was still an age where the stink of that corruption was so great that most people didn't want to touch it. Most of the baseball writers didn't want to have anything to do with it. That is no longer the case. As you say, you have a casino in your pocket as you walk down the street now, or as you sit in the ballpark.
Absolutely.
So things have changed. I don't know that I'd say they've changed for the better.
And on that note, Andrew, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us. We live in interesting times.
We sure do. Thank you very much.
Andrew Forbes, author of Fieldwork on Baseball and Making a Living. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0822, and you'll find links to Andrew's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
How excited am I that spring is here? I got so excited, I wet my plants.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram.
I'm standing Nova Scotia proud for Canada. This is Anne Murray. Early in my career, I received a lot of pressure to move to the U.S., but I just couldn't do it. Canada was my safe haven, my light at the end of the tunnel, and it still is. Buy Canadian. Shop as if your country depends upon it. Keep your money in Canada for Canada.
Available on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and just about every other way you stream audio. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's radio that's everywhere you want to be. And some places you don't.
And still to come on the program, we will talk to Jackiem Joyner, who is a saxophonist, music producer, and author. His book is called Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. Plus, Marc Hartzman, the WeirdHistorian.com curator, is on with the Weird Story for the month of May. We also have a morning shower thought and, of course, an idiot of the day coming your way, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. Los Angeles NBC4 TV sports writer Michael Duarte arrived at his home in Echo Park on May the 10th to find it had been ransacked. While taking in the damage, Duarte went into his bedroom and discovered a naked man sleeping in his bed. Duarte told a friend who was waiting in a nearby car to call police. Duarte believes the Goldilocks intruder had spent several hours in the house. Said Duarte,
he ate a box of ice cream sandwiches. He ate Dole Whip, a whole box of Beyond Beef burgers. He stuck in the microwave, cooked them, and then ate them.
The intruder had clogged the toilet with towels, and then there was the issue of 60 pieces of chewing gum.
And I had a fresh pack with 60 inside, unopened. He opened it up, chewed all of them, and then spit a big wad of gum about this big, the size of a softball, like on my kitchen table.
The intruder had also killed a possum with a statue and left it on the back patio. As the suspect was led away, he yelled to both the cops and Duarte that he was going to kill everyone. Yikes. Trust me from experience. When you're working in a television newsroom, you never really want to be part of the news. Yeah. A woman appeared at a hotel in Panama City, Florida, and told the front desk worker that she was there to, quote, pick her up, unquote. She unzipped her jacket, revealing a shirt underneath with ICE printed on the front, and presented a business card for the sheriff's office. The her she was targeting submitted to custody and was taken away, but became suspicious and asked a bystander to call 911. The Bay County Sheriff's Office responded and determined it was more than a ruse. It was a kidnap case. The victim is in the process of becoming a legal U.S. resident, and the victim thought the woman was part of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They identified the suspect as 52-year-old LaTrance Battle and found that the victim was at the hotel with her boyfriend, which happens to be Battle's ex-husband, who has a restraining order against his ex-wife. Battle was arrested, charged with kidnap, robbery, impersonating a law enforcement officer, and felony violation of probation. So, she was pretending to be an ICE agent, and now she'll be put on ice for a while herself. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, a North Carolina Popeyes manager was accused of shooting his co-worker over burnt biscuits. 22-year-old Rodney Wood was arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder. The shooting happened at around 6 p.m. on May 11th. A witness, who was a customer at the time of the shooting, told police the altercation stemmed from an argument between Wood and another manager because of overcooked biscuits. The witness reported that both went outside after one challenged the other, which led to a physical fight. During the fight, Wood allegedly pulled a gun and fired 2 rounds. Court documents state that a video taken from the scene shows that Wood discharged his firearm twice at point-blank range. Both shots hit Wood's co-worker, one in the groin and the other in the chest. That employee was rushed to hospital in life-threatening condition with critical injuries. He underwent emergency surgery. When officers arrived at the restaurant, Wood was gone, but police found and apprehended him within the same shopping center that Popeyes was in. Wood claimed to police that once he and the other manager stepped outside, he was punched in the face 3 times. He then allegedly fired 2 warning shots that were not intended to kill. The 2 allegedly had conflicts in the past, which caused Wood to request a transfer to avoid working with the other employee. You know, I'm all for quality controls, but I think in this case, some people take it a little too far.
Say hello to my new Popeyes Buttermilk Biscuit Butterfly Shrimp. Big, beautiful shrimp breaded in a buttermilk biscuit batter. Buttermilk Biscuit Butterfly Shrimp. I know, that's a mouthful.
Not when they're burnt. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Jackiem Joyner is a contemporary saxophonist, music producer, and an author. His latest book is called Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. He joins us via Zoom from Phoenix. Hi, Jackiem.
Hey, what's going on, Peter? Thanks for inviting me on the show, man.
Thanks for being on the program with us. Now, you've written several books, but most of your books are fiction, and we'll get to that in a moment. This is a nonfiction book, correct?
It is. I would say it's my first nonfiction, kind of unexpected book.
Unexpected why?
Well, I didn't think I would be putting something out that's kind of inspiring people to take bold action, take bold moves, because I was sitting one day, because I have lots of notes and affirmations that I've been writing and collecting over the years just to keep myself in tune with life and just everything that I got to take on, every day, every week, every year in order to really make my mark here on this earth. So I was just thinking to myself, these notes that I've written to myself over the past 5-6 years would really be nice if I refined them and perhaps gave them away and put them together in kind of a book where you can just like open up a page and then have a quote for a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, just to kind of keep you on track, because it kept me on track, honestly. But it wasn't a book. It was just, these were notes. These were affirmations.
Are you the type of person who believes that if you write it, if you speak it, you will speak it into existence?
I believe that partly. I believe that if you write it and you speak it, you'll do it, because I'm an action person and I love to remind myself about taking actions. Bold moves is it's movement. It's doing. It's acting out. Dreams without actions, it's a dream. So I kept myself, and I always do, trying to keep myself acting and doing what I've told myself that I was going to do, or whatever goals that I've set out for myself. The thing is a lot of this stuff, a lot of the actions that I've taken are bold. My very first book, Zaria, was bold. I was never an author. I never wrote a book before. I was known as a musician. And now all of a sudden I decided to take a bold move and see if I could put out my own science fiction book.
Were you a science fiction fan beforehand, or was this just something you wanted to tackle as an author?
I would say I was always a science fiction fan from a kid. So ever since I was a child, particularly movies. I love the movies. I love the theater. I love the sound, the music, the art that goes with it. Some of the big movies, that everyone loves, like Star Wars or Avatar, or even movies like The Fifth Element. Something drew me to, I was always fascinated with futuristic type of movie lines and storylines and things like that. That always fascinated me in the movies. I couldn't wait for the new or latest science fiction movie that would come to the theater. But I was also kind of a critic too, because I was thinking, they should have added this, they should have done this. It would have been so much better if the story ended this way. Until one day I said to myself, well, how about you write your own story? You can end it however you want.
Okay, so I mentioned that you are also a musician. You're a contemporary saxophonist. And as a matter of fact, you are currently on tour for most of the spring and summer. And I'm just wondering, from a creative aspect, how different is your mind musically from what you write as an author, and how disciplined do you have to be either or?
I think they both require a good amount of discipline. I feel like I'm using the same energy. I feel like I'm engaging in the same type of passion, because I find passion in music just like I find passion in writing. In fact, I didn't know that I would find so much passion in writing as I did, of course, as a songwriter. Performing and writing songs are actually quite different. I am a songwriter. I've written most of the songs that I've put out, but I found that writing stories felt the same. It's taking people on a journey, giving people an experience from your perspective, from your imagination, turning that into a literature and creating a world that people can immerse themselves in, which is the same with music and an album.
Well, let's go back a little bit. How did little Jackiem become a saxophone player?
Wow, that's I'm glad you asked that question, because the saxophone was also a surprise. I didn't think that I would be playing the saxophone at 14 years old in high school when I started. I was playing the drums a couple of years in middle school at a few churches. So I saw myself as this drummer. So when I finally graduated middle school and went to high school, I wanted to play the drums. So that's what I thought was going to happen. But that's not what happened. Fate would have it. The music teacher told me that they already have enough drummers. Everyone wants to be a drummer. So he asked me to try something else. He was trying to put together a pet band for the the pet rallies and stuff like that, for a band to play at the pet rallies. So he said, if you could learn how to play a brass instrument or a woodwind instrument, that would really be great. And you can probably get a spot here in the music class. So, my music teacher, Lou Adams, in Syracuse, New York, Fowler High School is where I graduated from, in Syracuse, New York. Yeah, showed me all of these instruments, and the first thing I saw was a tuba. Didn't know what that was. I knew it was really large. Then I saw a trumpet, with the three valves, and it looked interesting, but maybe not interesting enough. And then I saw this other instrument. I thought it was made of gold. It probably had some over 1,000 buttons on it. It looked really intimidating, really expensive. So I said, "Hey, what is that?" And he said, "Well, that, young sir, is a saxophone." I said, "Show me how to play that." And the rest is history. Gave me a tape. On the cassette tape was John Coltrane, Cannonball, Charlie Parker, Grover Washington Jr. I didn't know who these artists were at the time, but something with about them connected with me. I took the saxophone home, and just that became home for me, practicing it every single day.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you didn't plan on being a saxophonist. You didn't necessarily plan on being a science fiction writer, and you didn't necessarily become or thought of becoming a nonfiction writer. So what was your plan when you started growing up? And how did all that change with all the different areas that you've now gone into?
Wow. It is so crazy because I still almost don't consider myself a nonfiction writer, even though I put out Bold Moves. I don't know. It's just hard to embrace it, and I'm trying to. But yeah, it's crazy because when I was young, to be honest, I wanted to be an astronaut. I was a kid with a big imagination. That's just who I was as a child. I wanted to go to space. Can you believe that? So I mean, I'm 8 years old. I'm looking at NASA on TV and thinking one day I'll be an astronaut. Now, I don't think I would want to be stuck in one of those ships in space. But it's interesting. I kind of feel like it's really nice when you allow things to happen and just take on a journey if it feels right to you and if it kind of touches you. I feel like I have something to give, and I want to give all I can, in this lifetime that I have.
Okay, so your new book is Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. So when you first started writing this book, what was the affirmation that came your way that you felt that has to be in the book?
Ooh, oh man, that's because I got so many affirmations. Consistency and repetition wins the day was one of them. I had another one that had something to do with he with the most discipline wins. Jumping in the water, the cold water, because I remember when I would always be afraid of jumping in the water because it's freezing. But sometimes you just got to jump right in. But I would say what made me really start thinking about is because that consistency in my first book, which was Zaria, writing 5 minutes every single day. I did that consistently for about a year, no matter what, just write for 5 minutes. And all of a sudden I finished that book. So consistency and repetition was really one of the first affirmations that I would say really set me on the way.
Well, congratulations on the book. The book is called Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. As I mentioned, you are also on tour. People can go to your website, which is JackemJoyner.com, and they can find out exactly where you're on tour and when you're coming to a place near them, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to be in June. We're going to be in Las Vegas, Philadelphia, down in Boca Raton, Florida. We're going to be in Atlanta and also San Diego. So pretty large tour happening this year. I'm very excited. Everyone can connect with me at JackemJoyner.com or follow me on Instagram at Jackiem Joyner or Facebook at Jackiem Joyner. I love to connect with people.
And I would also assume that you're selling a book or two while you're on tour as well.
A few. Absolutely. You can get a signed copy of Bold Moves or any one of my other books, or you can get one of my CDs.
Excellent. Jackiem, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thanks, Peter. This has really been a pleasure.
Jackiem Joyner, a contemporary saxophonist, music producer, and an author. His latest book is Bold Moves, Quotes and Reflections for Building Confidence and Resilience. Plus, he's also on tour with his music. He's a multi-talented guy. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0822, and you'll find links to Jackem's site, where you can find out where he's touring and listen to some of his music, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
There is no clearer definition of competence than a dog carrying its own leash.
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a show that perfectionists take with them everywhere, from point A to point A+.
And still to come in the program, we'll have Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, with the weird story for the month of May. Plus, we do indeed have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on, and a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you right here, right now. 26-year-old James Brown from Northumberland in the UK was accused of setting his own house on fire just to see firefighters at work. In 2023, firefighters were dispatched after Brown called to report a fire. However, 90 minutes after that fire was extinguished, Brown called in another fire. Officials began to suspect the flames were started intentionally. A background check revealed that Brown had called the department 80 times in 1 year. He eventually pleaded guilty to arson, said Judge Robert Adams. You wasted the resources of the fire brigade, which could be used for more important matters where lives are in danger. I hope you have learned a lesson. Well, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But for the love of God, don't let him get a fireman's calendar. And while visiting the Colosseum in Rome, Italy, a man apparently decided to get a closer look. The 47-year-old attempted to climb the fence surrounding the ancient building, then fell and skewered himself on the metal bars at the top, screaming while horrified witnesses looked on. It took medics about 20 minutes to detach the man from the fence and stabilize him. He was taken to a nearby hospital in critical condition and received 80 stitches and an emergency surgery. The man's identity hasn't been released, but reports say he's an American who's a resident of Taiwan. You know, Maximus needed a sword and shield. Rome just apparently needs a spiky fence. Also, I was thinking of making this guy the Idiot of the Day, but I didn't. The Idiot of the Day is coming up a few moments later from now. But I will give you a hint. It does involve, like this story, a fence. But perhaps I've said too much. In any case, Let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a weird story for the month of May. He joins us via Zoom from New York. And Marc, we seem to be on a UFO kick, and this time we're looking about the possibility of communicating with the Red Planet back in May of 1909.
Yeah, this is a story about Professor David Todd from Amherst University, who wanted to receive signals from Martians in 1909 when Mars was in opposition to Earth. So what that means is Mars was at its closest point in its orbit to Earth that year. It's about a 2-year orbit for Mars. So about every 2 years or so, it's at its closest point, which is roughly 35 million miles away. So to back up a second, there was a lot of belief amongst the scientific community in intelligent life on Mars at that time, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the thought that there was intelligent Martians there who might be trying to send us signals, and how could we receive those signals? So in 1909, in May, there was a great headline that ran in newspapers that said, "Balloon trip to hear Mars talk." And basically, David Todd thought if he could build a hot air balloon to ascend 50,000 feet, he could then get above all the sort of interference that's, closer to the ground to receive Martian signals that he believed that they were sending to us. And he could have his wireless telegram instrument to receive those kinds of signals. And maybe we could figure out how to decode them or translate them, or, whatever you'd have to do with these kinds of Martian messages to figure out what it might be. And perhaps even figure out a way to send messages back to the Martians and start communication with the Red Planet.
This was at a time when radio was just beginning, right? So radio frequencies, I guess this guy, he decided that radio frequencies, David Todd, were, I guess, interfering with any signals coming in.
Yeah, just sort of, any noises, ether waves that surround us. So getting up into the rarefied atmosphere, he thought, would get us to a point where there could be nothing to disturb us in receiving those messages. So basically, the prevailing thought was that Mars is a smaller planet. And so when the planets would have formed, its core would have cooled earlier because it was smaller. Life would have started sooner. Evolution, therefore, gets a head start. And thus the thought that they were much more advanced. And so David Todd, in this particular article, again, the trip he was planning was for September, but this was kind of announcing this in May to the public. And so he said, if there's life on Mars, the people ought, in the nature of things, to surpass us in intelligence and therefore understand communication, perhaps electric communication, much better than we. Doubtless they are past masters in the art of ether waves. So again, he had this assumption that they could easily send us messages. We just had to get ourselves to a point where we could actually receive those messages and then do what we could with them.
Did he ever think that the possibility of the response would have been, if he got a response, was that, try and keep the noise down there?
I guess it would have been interesting to see, like, if we got a message, what that might have been, and then, do we dare respond to it, or what's the outcome of that, establishing communication. But again, like, he wasn't the only one who was trying to find ways to communicate. This was just kind of going on at that time. There was another professor from Harvard, Professor William Henry Pickering, who devised had a plan for a giant grid of mirrors to flash light signals at the Martians. And then ideally they would figure out a way to send messages back to us. This was just thinking that was going on. In fact, David Todd, so I should note, I mentioned this was sort of announcing his plan in May. And by the way, he had this whole thing worked out. He was going to have, supply of oxygen for him, going to the altitude he would need it. He was going to have a piano wire that would go all the way to the ground as a grounding device, like 50,000-foot piano wire. So he was working out all the details of this thing. In fact, I think it was the 1909 attempt. He did a 5,000-foot attempt with his wife. So he did do that, but no one had ever ascended 50,000 feet in a hot air balloon at this time. And this didn't end up happening. I think it's worth noting. He did not do this in 1909. But in 1920, Mars was once again in opposition. And he tried it again. He had the same idea. He was like, okay, well, it's got another shot. Let's try and do it now. And this time he was working with the government. And he had the government's chief balloon instructor, which I didn't know was a position, but apparently it was. I don't know if it still is. But there was a chief balloon instructor who was working with him, and they were set to go. They had everything worked out. This guy was going to, fly them up safely. But at the last minute, the War Department said, well, we need to give you permission to use our facilities or, some of our technology or whatever. And they ultimately didn't give him permission kind of at the last minute, just before he was thinking he was going to go finally get his Martian signals in 1920.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't this the same guy who tried to get radio stations to shut down just briefly so that a signal could get through?
Yes, that's right. I think that was 1924. And I think he got one station to shut down. He recorded basically a series of dots and small lines on a long tape. I forgot. I think it was like a 30-foot tape or something. And he believed that in that design, it was sort of created through these dots and various dashes and so forth. Not Morse code or anything, but he thought that there was a human face appearing on this visual. The guy who invented this machine was like, yeah, I don't think it's a face. I think it's one of those things you got to see what you want to see. But yes, David Todd he was really pushing for it. He strongly believed that the Martians were out there. In fact, there's a quote for him I have in the Big Book of Mars where he basically says that, it's us who are the stupid ones who can't figure out how to receive their messages, and the Martians must be kind of laughing at us. That was his basic attitude.
So he had an inferiority complex, is what you're saying.
Yes, so we Earthlings. We silly Earthlings.
Now,
what do we know?
This is one of the stories that comes from one of your previous books, We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. And just before we went to air, you said this is one of your favorite Mars stories. Now, you've written an entire book about Mars, so why is this one of your favorite stories?
Yeah, so also this also appears in the Big Book of Mars, along with some images of some of the newspaper clippings. I just love the idea. This whole era of the early 1900s, I'm completely fascinated by it. It's what got me into Mars to begin with. That general belief in intelligent life on Mars and the different ways that we were going about either sending messages or attempting to receive them. So David Todd's plan to ascend in the hot air balloon, to me, was just so incredible and outrageous, but he so ardently believed in it and really pushed for this thing to happen. And like I said, really made great progress in 1920 working with the chief balloon instructor from the government. So I just loved his energy and his passion and his drive to do this thing and just that conviction in his beliefs. I just find it completely fascinating. And this was... He would, like I mentioned, William Henry Pickering from Harvard, but also Nikola Tesla believed he received messages from Mars in 1899. And throughout his life, the rest of his life, he was pursuing ways to make contact with extraterrestrial beings out in the solar system. Guglielmo Marconi also believed he received Martian signals in 1920 and was convinced and kept trying to search for that for the next 2 years until he discovered that the 100,000 meter wavelength that he detected that he believed was from Mars actually came from Schenectady, New York, from the headquarters of GE, which was must have been so much less exotic. Must have been quite disappointing to know that it wasn't Mars, it was just Schenectady.
Well,
so that whole era fascinates me.
GE's slogan is, "We bring good things to life." So they were looking for life.
Maybe they were.
I find it very interesting that our early ancestors who thought that Mars was inhabited thought that whomever was there was smarter than us. And as time goes on, we still think that life is out there somewhere in the universe, but we don't necessarily think it's smarter than us.
In some cases, the thought would be that if life is getting here, they're more advanced than we are in order to get here. So there's that thought that if there are UFOs and aliens are visiting, then they must be far superior than we are to have figured out how to traverse that distance in space. So there's some belief that yes, they must be much more advanced than us. But it feels often to me like even in the 1800s, when there was belief on life on Mars, people were sort of projecting what it could be like, almost using that as this utopian example of like, well, on Mars, people are probably so much more civilized and have figured out how to get past war and disease, and life must be wonderful there. There's quotes of scientists and astronomers who were longing to go to Mars, to be there, because it would be so much better than it is here on Earth, which of course it's not. Mars would be a horrible place to be. You'd die in a split second if you went to Mars, without any proper gear or protection, or, if something happened, you'd be gone in an instant. So Mars is not friendly to humans at all. But back then, it seemed like it could be, very friendly to life.
If David Todd were alive today, do you think he would still be trying to find signs of intelligence out there in the universe? Maybe not necessarily on Mars, but beyond?
I bet he would, yeah. He would be, I'm sure, past Mars, obviously given the evidence we have now, all the imagery and data from the rovers and so forth. But I imagine he would be looking further, whether it's through radio astronomy or other methods. The James Webb Telescope has been getting us some interesting data on exoplanets. So I'm sure he'd be all over that, trying to figure out what we could using the technology we have today. I'm sure he would be loving it.
Well, here's to David Todd, wherever he is right now. And thank you once again for being on the program and sharing our weird story for the month of May.
Thanks. Always great to be here.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com and also the publisher at CuriousPublications.com. He's the author of several books, including the book that this story comes from, which is called We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. His most recent one is co-authored by Dan Meyer and is called To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0822, and you'll find the link to Marc's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
A visitor at the Cabog Mangrove Park and Wetlands Zoo in the Philippines got an idea. The 29-year-old man climbed a chain-link fence, waded through the water, and grinned as he took out his smartphone trying to pose with a plastic crocodile in the water. Well, the croc was no croc. In fact, it was a real-life, cold-blooded 15-foot beast that was quite unhappy with the intrusion and grabbed the man's arm with her toothy grin and wouldn't let go. The man screamed in agony for 20 minutes until the croc's handler risked his own life by going in to rescue him. By then, the croc, named Lele, decided the man's thigh was a better thing to bite and started a death roll with him. The handler stopped the attack by smashing a concrete block onto her head. Medics were able to stop the worst of the bleeding and rush the man to a hospital. Said a police sergeant, he put other people's lives at risk, and he is very, very lucky to have survived. Now, why? Oh, why? Do you think zookeepers would put a chain-link fence around a fake crocodile? And even if you thought it was fake, why would you climb said fence and get into the murky water just to get a selfie? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0822. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com. And once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0822. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as P.A. Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, or you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSL-LP FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZH-LP FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Void where prohibited, offer slightly different in Canada. For a complete transcript of this program, next time write down everything Peter says.